Darn it, I hit go live.
Hey, hi, how you doing today?
I'm well. Good to see you.
Good, right? Hello, everyone. Good to see everyone.
Yes. Let's get started, shall we? All right.
Okay, we're on live now, Dr. Benders.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, to the Opportunity Youth Academy Governance Council meeting. It is November 18th, 2021. I am Dr. Jessica Bonduras, the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services, and I'd like to call the meeting to order. Let's take attendance, please, Director Morales.
Yes, so Dr. Benders is here. Austin Block, you are here. Damaris Brooks, here. Derek Clark,
Here.
Ashley Moore, is that correct, Ashley?
Yes, I'm here.
And we don't, Joelle Henson.
Here.
And I believe that's everyone we have at this time.
Okay, thank you. The next topic is the adoption of the agenda. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda?
I motion to adopt the agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Great, thank you. Agenda adopted. Dr. Morales, are there any public comments this evening?
I see no public comments at this time, Dr. Benders.
Thank you. All right. Let's move on in our agenda to informational items. For our informational items today, we have the welcome and introductions of new council members. So I'm so happy to see everyone. The board did adopt in an action to have all of you continue in membership and also welcome our new members. So at this time, could we please go around and introduce yourselves and your affiliation with OYA if you have one, or your interest in being on the Governance Council. So Joelle, can we start with you, please? And
Sure.
Person.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Joelle Hanson. I am the CTE coordinator for Santa Clara County Office of Education. This is, I believe, my third year as a member, and my interest has always been for alternative education and helping alternative education in college and career readiness and viable career pathways once they leave.
Thank you. Austin?
Hi, everyone. My name is Austin Block. I work with the Justice Ed program, working as an education liaison with youth on juvenile probation. Some of the students that I work with are enrolled at OYA, others at districts throughout the county. I'm looking forward to working with you all.
Thank you, Austin. I'm just going to call people in order on my screen. Derek?
Yes, hi. My name is Derek Clark. I am a division director here at Bill Wilson Center. And so Bill Wilson Center and Opportunity Youth have done projects together, and also our students here at Bill Wilson Center attend the OYA like academies. And it's been very instrumental in our educational plan for our young people here.
There you go, Doctor.
Thank you, Derek. Damaris, would you go next?
Hi, everyone. Damaris Brooks. I'm the Director of Workforce Development and Organizational Culture here at the Santa Clara County Office of Education. This is my third year on the board, and I just really value this connection to our student program. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Ashley?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Moore. I am a student at OYA. I just graduated October of this year. I am currently the student representative for the OYA Governance Council. I am also a parent representative for my daughter's school and vice chairperson for the Santa Clara County Board of Education for her division as well. I also just actually got done with my panel interview for para-educator with the OYA as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Ashley. And Courtney, welcome. I'd like to note, Director Morales, that Courtney is here. Courtney, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bondurez. Hi, everyone. I'm Courtney. First of all, Ashley, welcome. We've been so excited and waiting for an OYA student to join this group. So excited that you're here, and congratulations on the many achievements that you just named. So I'm Courtney. I am with Groundworks Consulting. Primarily, my work is with a group of young adults. They call themselves the Youth Liberation Movement. And we're working together to build an organization that's entirely led by young adults, so that we can make sure more young adults like Ashley are at tables like these. And I think this is also my third year on the Governance Council. So super excited to be here and continuing this work with all of you.
Thank you so much. And it's just, Director Morales, would you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Phil Morales. I'm the Director of Opportunity Youth. I've been working with OYA now. I think this is my 5th year. I'm going on my 5th year. I'm very excited to have more members on the Governance Council, especially Ashley and Austin. It's great to have you joining this wonderful team. You are so very important to the work that we do in OYA, especially providing input and feedback in the areas of our LCAP, our SIPSA, just kind of the overall drive of OYA. So your input and your work with us is just very important. So I look forward to working with you as a team, but certainly I'm always available if you have any questions about just what we're doing in OYA, or have any thoughts or ideas on how we can do better, then certainly send me an email, or or you can speak to Dr. Bonduras, and she certainly will reach out to me as well. But I'm just excited to have all of you be a part of this wonderful school, because it really is. And I'm going to keep going. I'm sorry, but really, what makes it a wonderful school as well is the staff. The teachers and the staff and the students. That's really what creates kind of the magic of OYA, and their commitment and their dedication to just the success of our students is just absolutely amazing. So if you ever want to tour around some of the sites, please reach out, and I'm more than happy to set that up for you, and come out and see some of our sites and some of the great work that our staff are doing.
Thank you so much. And speaking of staff, we have Blanca here. Blanca, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, good evening. My name is Blanca Morales. I am the admin assistant for OYA.
Welcome. Well, welcome everyone. The next part of our meeting is informational, and I think it'll be really interesting. It's a Brown Act training. And so we have Catherine Mayola here to give us that training. And she has been doing a lot of this training before. This is old hat, I'm sure, but it'll be really great for us to see. And so please sit back and let's start our learning.
Great. Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to have you to be here and presenting on this topic that I actually find super interesting and very fun. And I've been doing it, sort of presentations on this topic for a very long time. So I'm happy to do that tonight. And if you have questions, please unmute yourself. We have a small group. So if you have a question, unmute yourself, ask it. If you have the materials, so I can always follow up later if there's some question as well. But getting into it. So the Brown Act, this is California's open meeting law. And if we could go to the next slide. Or I can do it too. Okay, there we go. So this is what I'm going to present to you tonight is just information. So I'm not providing actually legal advice. And so this is what this slide is about, the fact that I'm just providing you information as a general matter. Okay, next slide. Okay, so in terms of the agenda, we are going to do an overview or go over the Brown Act, the intent of the Brown Act, the reasons behind it. Now, the reason why I do that is so that you can try to understand where it's coming from. It's not just these set of rules that you have to just adhere to, and you do have to adhere to them, but understanding what they're about is the best way of compliance. And so we're going to go over overview of the Brown Act, the definition of meetings, social media use, which is a new law that came into effect in January of 2020 or 2021. I'll see. And then closed session, what is that? Although you likely are not going to have very many closed session, I think, discussions. However, there is provisions with regard to that. And then we're also going to talk about AB 361, which is one of the reasons why we're able to do teleconference meetings here, because I know you've already passed the resolution about having to meet via teleconference due to the health and safety risk of COVID-19. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the intent of the Brown Act, and you know, sort of says this in the open meeting law, if you will, and that is that public agencies in the state exist to aid in the conduct of the people's business. So it's the intent of the law that your actions as governing board members be taken openly, and that your deliberations, that is how you reached your decision on any particular matter, be open, be conducted openly. And so a lot of times with elected officials, they hesitate about, they want to appear as if they have all the answers and they know exactly what they're going to do. But that's actually not the way the Brown Act is designed. The Brown Act is designed to see you in action, see you reach your decisions. And so that's why they are to be conducted openly. And so the purpose of the Brown Act is to facilitate this public participation. That is a notice, right? And notice aspect to it, and also attendance or viewing of the agency in the process. Okay, and the point of that, right? The point of facilitating the public participation is to curb the misuse, because transparency and openness will try to ferret out or stop the misuse of the democratic process, that is by secret ballot or by colluding on a decision and that kind of thing. So, okay, next slide, please. Okay, so so the Brown Act actually was passed in 1973, I think, and then, or 1937, actually, now that I think about it. But no worries, Courtney, at all. So, and then in 2004, it was added to the California Constitution. And so now, along with Public Records Act as well. So now the open meeting law aspect, as well as the Public Records Act aspect, is now embedded in the California Constitution. And so because it is no longer even it is a statute, but at the same time, it has the force and effect of the California constitutional statement, that the Brown Act, as well as the Public Records Act, if you will, is liberally interpreted. So broader access and aspects of the law are what the courts do, and so they typically rule in favor of public participation and government transparency. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the general rule, this is the Brown Act general rule, is that all meetings of a legislative body shall be open and public, and that persons shall be permitted to attend, except as otherwise provided. And so the except as otherwise provided is the closed session that we're going to talk about later. And this idea flows down from the legislative body itself to committees and other subsidiary bodies of the legislative body. And so any committee, any standing committee that is like one that's, doesn't have a specific time component to it, or doesn't have a specific subject matter component to it, and that is made by formal action of the governing board, is a legislative body. Are legislative bodies for the purpose of the Brown Act, and must also comply as well. Because the whole point on that is that you don't want a governing board to then form the subcommittee, right? And make them do all the work and have the Brown Act not be applied to the subcommittee, right? So you can't circumvent the Brown Act rules by creating a subcommittee to do the work. And so any subcommittee you create also needs to comply with the Brown Act as well. Next slide, please. Okay. So examples of legislative bodies are not only the governing board of the County Office of Education, if you will, but also, and a community college district, but also the regional occupation boards and joint powers of authority boards that are created by two joint powers that are coming together, as well as commissions, committees, boards that are created by resolution or some formal action, like I said. Next slide, please. And then committees. So this is typically seen as an talked about as an ad hoc committee. So committees appointed by the superintendent, president, chancellor, without any formal action by the board are not covered by the act. However, the board must not in any way instigate. So in other words, the board can't say, look, we'd really like a subcommittee and we'd like these two people to be part of that subcommittee. And that would probably be viewed as formal action. And so therefore that subcommittee should be, the Brown Act should apply to that subcommittee. So only an ad hoc committee, which is what they're typically called, something that's appointed for something that's formed for a specific time, specific purpose, and not done by formal action, is a type of committee that doesn't necessarily have to comply with the Brown Act. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, meeting. So what is a meeting? So when we talk about a meeting, like what is a meeting? Meetings, and this is the definition in the Brown Act, which is incorporated into the government code, and the sections are here. But a meeting is any congregation. So any coming together of a majority of members of the legislative body to hear, discuss, deliberate, take action, or take action. And so sometimes what you'll see is, and I have some photos here, so you'll see like maybe the 5 board members huddling in the corner at a conference or something like that. And if they're discussing anything within the jurisdiction of the legislative body, that would be a meeting. And that would be in violation of the Brown Act because it wouldn't have been agenda, and have the notice posted and that kind of thing. And then I also hear people say, well, 5 members, were corresponding on email of the governing board, and there was a lot of back and forth, but they didn't take any action. I mean, nothing happened, right, as a result of that. Well, the problem is that the meeting is defined by also the congregation of majority hearing, or discussing or deliberating, thinking about, if you will. And so it doesn't require that action be taken either. So then when we take this concept, right, and obviously it was written well before sort of the internet, I think, and also things like Google Docs, right, and emails and sharing of information or text messages, like a group text, right? So all of those, if you have a majority of members that are congregating even virtually, that is the definition, that is within the definition of the meaning of the Brown Act. So next slide, please. Okay, and then there's also this concept called a serial meeting, and I have some illustrations of this. And of course, this is some lawyer humor where we've taken a photo of cereal, but it's not that kind of cereal that we're talking about, of course. So a serial meeting is like when one board member communicates with another board member, and that board member communicates with the third board member, and the information is passed along so that there's a virtual congregation eventually of the 3 or the majority of the board. So I have some illustrations of this in the next slide. Okay, so this is a 5-member board, for example, and so this is an example of a serial meeting, which is you have one board member communicating to board member number 2, communicating to board number 3, who communicates to board number 4. So like, let's just say it's simply like, hey, how are you going to vote on that agenda item coming up? Oh, I'm going to vote for it. And then 2 says, hey, 1 is voting for it, I'm going to vote for it. 3, what are you thinking about, right? And so that's a congregation of a majority. So this is not okay. All right, next slide, please. This is also not okay. So let me be clear on this one because some people get confused, but the staff members are not do not have to comply with the Brown Act. The staff members are not elected officials that are part of the legislative body. The staff members can communicate with each board member. However, what the staff members cannot do is serve as a hub, if you will, of the collective body. So in other words, in this illustration here, we're talking about a discussion that's happening between, and this is even if the board members don't necessarily communicate their positions or how they're going to vote, but if there's a discussion between, so let's say board member number 1 says to staff member, hey, this agenda item that we have coming up, this contract that needs approval, what's that about? I mean, I need more information on it. I mean, do you think it's a good idea? Not? Oh, okay. And you think other board members are going to support it? Okay, all right, I'll think about that. Same kind of conversation happens with board number two and board number 3. So at that point, in this scenario, right, with the 1, 2, 3 board members of a 5-member board, you automatically have the staff member serving as the hub of the collective discussion, if you will. And so that's not okay. Like, this is still, not okay. So next slide, please. So what is it? What is not a serial meeting? So how do we avoid this? And I have some illustrations of how to avoid this as well. And that is, an employee or an official can engage in separate conversations with the board members. So if the board members have questions, you can answer those questions. And you can provide information. You can even provide the same information to all 5 board members of a 5-member board, for example. But what you can't do is engage in the discussion, the back and forth with the board members about how they're going to vote or what they're thinking about in terms of the upcoming agenda items. And again, I know why this happens, because elected officials, want to appear to the public as if they have all the answers, right? But that's actually not the purpose of the Brown Act. The purpose of the Brown Act is to allow a window, by the public into how the board members arrive at their decision. Okay, next slide, please. So in this illustration here, like I'm saying, the staff member can provide information to all board members, all 5 board members, without violating the Brown Act. The staff member can also provide, let's say you use one email and you blind copy all the board members. Staff member can do that. That's not a problem. Blind copying is best because then you don't get that inadvertent reply all, right? Next slide, please. And then this is also okay, like I said. So if the board members have questions and the staff wants to provide the answers, they can do that. And they can also take those answers and provide it to all the other board members as well. Again, in a either blind copy situation or individually, but you can provide, if one board member is asking questions that you think the answers to will provide good information for the rest of the board, you can do that. That's not a problem. What you just can't do is that discussion, that back and forth discussion, because then you're getting into the deliberation process that is defined as part of the meeting, if that makes sense. And I know I'm going through these pretty quick, so just again, if there's anything you would like additional explanation on, please. I nerd out on this stuff, so I really do enjoy it. So, okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is also not okay. So in this situation, and this is the reply all situation, that it's unfortunate sometimes that happens. And I think it happened more often, maybe before people became a little bit more used to using the blind copy feature. But sometimes a board member will ask, information of the staff member, and then that staff member will, or actually will provide the information, then that board member will then reply all to everyone else. And again, that reply all is problematic. Because even if they're just, like this slide says, even if they're just reading their email, again, hearing the information is the same as reading it when you receive it via email, if you will. And so it is problematic. So in these situations, the staff member would then want to say, please don't reply all. Let's take this offline, to a different way of corresponding so that we don't have this problem. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, so yeah, it was, this is the new law that was signed into on social media use. And it was signed into law on September 18, 2020, and became effective January 1 of 2021. This law, and you're gonna probably, it's gonna probably surprise you a little bit, but I want you to think for me the archaic, if you will, description of sort of the town hall meeting. So you have a board member coming to a town square, and he has a megaphone, right? And he's providing information to the public about an upcoming agenda item. That was perfectly fine for that board member to do that. And then we transport that into the 20th century or 21st century, and we have social media, and we have blog posts, and we have Facebook, and we have those types of things. So this law, I think, was attempting to virtually create that town hall feeling while still not running afoul of the Brown Act. So what this law says is that a legislative body member may engage in separate communications on an internet-based social media platform to answer questions, provide information to the public, and or solicit public input on matters within the body's jurisdiction. And so a board member could have a blog post, could engage in conversations with the public via Facebook or something to that effect, okay? Or even Slack, or anything like that. So next slide. Oh, next slide, please. What they cannot do is a majority of the body may not discuss among themselves business of a specific nature within the body's jurisdiction on social media. So any communications that are made, posted, or shared on social media between members of the legislative body, even if it's a blog post, even if it's a Facebook thing or something to that effect, they may not do that. You run afoul of this law, run afoul of the Brown Act, if you will. And I've received a lot of pushback from board members over the years. They're like, well, what if we said we were going to be on this blog post at this time, and or it's open to the media, it's open to the public, so why isn't this discussion allowed? And the point on that is that, again, with the Brown Act, it's not just having access to having the public have access to it, but it's also notice, right? So that agenda that you're posting about your upcoming discussion items or information items or voting items, that agenda is notice to the public about what the meeting is going to be about. And on blog posts and social media discussions, you don't have that type of notice. But what this law also says is that comments or use of digital icons that express reactions or communications made by the members, like emojis, the like button, retweeting on Twitter, that is against the law. That's problematic. Okay. Now, and I hear, when I give presentations on this, like, people are like, well, you can't be serious. It's, the like button, right? And of course, if someone is posting like a social thing, like their son or daughter just graduated from the academy, for example, you can like that, right? That's not subject matter within the jurisdiction. But if they're posting anything that relates to any kind of matter that's going to come in front of you for jurisdiction, or any kind of matter that's within the subject matter jurisdiction of the body, you cannot like that. So you really want to be careful about other board members' social media posts or blog posts, and not engaging, in that. Okay. And also, individual trustees may not also directly respond to a social media communication made or posted or shared by any other board member within the subject matter jurisdiction. So same thing, you have to really take it upon yourself to be really careful about your other fellow board members and the things that they're doing on social media, so that you don't inadvertently, violates Brown Act. Next slide, please. Okay, so I was just talking about this, the notice of meetings, which is the agenda. The Brown Act requires that the agenda must be conspicuously posted at least 72 hours in advance and freely accessible to members of the public. And the point on the agenda, again, is to give notice to the public about what the board members are going to be discussing about or information or taking action on. The agenda does not, there's no specific law about what the description has to have within it. It just has to have, it must reasonably inform the public of the matters that are going to be considered in sufficient detail so that the public can determine whether they want to participate in the meeting. And so typically the rule of thumb is about 20 words is sufficient for reasonably informing the public of the upcoming item. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's also, so that's regular meeting is the one that has to be posted 72 hours in advance. And then there's also the special meeting. Special meeting can be called by the board for any purpose that's within the board members, the board's jurisdiction. A special meeting notice only has to be posted 24 hours in advance, but the board can only consider the notice that's in, the board can only consider the business that's specified in the notice. And there's no requirement to schedule general public comment that's not related to agenda items at the special meeting. The board may consider closed session items as part of a special meeting. However, the board cannot consider items regarding salaries, salary schedules, or compensation in the form of fringe benefits. That's one of the laws that resulted from a series of high profile events that happened within the last, I think, 10 years from the city of Bell down in Southern California. I don't know if you remember any of the news stories on that, but it's a really small city and the city manager was ended up making like $500,000 a year or something like that. And the board would approve these types of salaries and salary schedules during special meetings when the public wasn't reasonably informed of what was being discussed. So next slide, please. Okay, so like I've been saying, so the public does need to be able to participate before and during the governing board's consideration of the item, and the board and the public participates through public comment. And it's true that the public receives the notice of the board meeting and also the ability to provide public comment. But having said all that, this is not the public's meeting. So even though the public gets to notice of the meeting and also gets to participate by providing public comment, they don't get to control the meeting. They don't get to demand that certain things be considered. They don't get to disrupt the meeting. This is still the board's meeting, even though it's open, if you will, to the public. Okay, next slide, please. As part of that, the reason, because it's the board's meeting, the board can adopt reasonable rules and regulations to ensure the proper functioning of the meeting, such as limiting public comment to 1 minute, 2 minutes, or 3 minutes, depending on your history and practice of what the board has done, or the number of people you have to comment on any particular item. But one of the things that the board cannot do is it cannot prohibit public criticism of policies, procedures, programs, or even persons, employees of the legislative body. Those have to be allowed to be presented, even though sometimes they're uncomfortable and difficult to hear. So, next slide, please. Okay, and then when you do have public comments at a board meeting, especially if they're critical ones, sometimes board members want to respond, right? But you really, because those items are typically not agendized, you really can only briefly respond to those statements made or questions posed by asking clarifying questions or making brief announcements or providing a reference to staff to follow up on those particular items, or request that the staff report back or place an item on the future agenda for a meeting. But because those, if a public is commenting on something that's not on the agenda, you really can't engage in a long discussion because it's not agendized. There's been no notice to the public that that discussion is going to be happening. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so minutes shall be taken, recording all the actions of the governing board, and the minutes are public records. There's no requirement of the type of there's no requirement of the length of the meeting minutes or whether it has to be verbatim. A lot of boards will just do a summary, but you do have to record all the actions that the governing board took, as well as the vote or abstention of any trustee present. So you have to list out how each board member voted. When we're doing a teleconference meeting like this, you have to do a roll call vote. That's required. But on regular meetings, you don't have to do a roll call vote, but the minutes have to reflect how each board member voted. Okay. Persons attending the meeting have the right to record meetings and things like that. So sometimes people will come to a board meeting ahead of time and place a recorder up on the dais. And when the board is like assembling before the meeting, that recording is picking up that sort of conversation and things like that. So you want to be aware of that as a potential issue that could result in unintended consequences. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're at closed session, which is that those the areas in which the government code and the Brown Act allow the board member to discuss in closed session so that the public is not present for that. And so they're limited areas, but they are areas in which either you're receiving confidential information, such as you're discussing existing or anticipated litigation, as well as public safety threats, student matters, individual personnel matters, that there's confidentiality that attaches to them, consulting with your real property negotiator or your labor negotiator for that matter. You don't want to require a public agency to expose all of their strategies, right? And what they're hoping to obtain in either negotiations or litigation. And so the Brown Act allows the board to meet in closed session on those items. Next slide, please. So for closed session, there is what's called safe harbor agenda descriptions, which means that you're not required to use these, but if you do use these and your discussion is within the safe harbor of the agenda description, it precludes a finding of a violation of closed session notice requirements. Okay, next slide, please. These are some of the examples of the safe harbor descriptions, which is conference with labor negotiator, for example, conference with legal counsel, existing litigation, those kinds of things. Next slide, please. So after closed session, if there is a vote, for example, taken, that vote needs to be reported out in open session, unless there's some other reason, like sometimes in employee actions, if there is an administrative process that's still happening, then you don't report out necessarily at that moment, but you might have to report out later. The reports are made either in orally or in writing. All documents referred to in a report of final action must be made available to any person who requests it. And if an individual, sometimes the media makes a standing request for all documents that are completed within closed session, that would have to be provided within 24 hours, for example, when closed session ends. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are some changes like 8361 that I just briefly mentioned about teleconference meetings that I wanted to talk about. So next slide, please. Okay, so AB 361 allows for new allowance for teleconference, like I said. So it was signed into law on September 16, 2021, and it was an emergency legislation, which means it took effect immediately, except for, so that was like a Thursday. It took effect immediately, except for that Monday. Then the governor acted to suspend that law until October 1. What happened back then was that the governor had already suspended several provisions of the Brown Act, and that was set to expire September 30th. And then this law was enacted within that time frame, and there was some confusion about whether this law would take precedence over the suspended laws, that kind of thing. Anyway, all that's over now. And now from October 1 to present, AB 361 is now a part of the Brown Act. So it amended the Brown Act in this government code section here, and it includes a new authorization for remote meetings. So these remote meetings can only occur during a state of emergency proclaimed by the governor, in which state or local health officials have imposed or recommended measures to promote social distancing, or the legislative body has determined or is meeting to determine, which means you can do it at the same meeting, by majority vote that that meeting in person would present imminent risk to the health and safety of the attendees. And that includes the board members, not just the public. Okay. Next slide, please. AB 361's provisions may be used only in the event of gubernatorial state of emergency. It's not sufficient if the county or city official has issued a local emergency declaration. Period. So if social distancing or imminent threat exists, and this obviously relates to COVID-19, but AB 361 could also apply to other emergencies that require either social distancing or imminent threat, such as fires, such as earthquake, things like that, okay? And then if those exist, there are some provisions of the traditional teleconferencing rules that are suspended, if you will, or not effective or amended, but not all of them. So let me explain that. Next slide, please. Okay, so now if we're conducting teleconferencing meetings under AB 361, we must still give timely notice of a meeting. That means posting the agenda within 72 hours for a regular board meeting, 24 hours for a special board meeting, or 1 hour notice for an emergency board meeting. Same as the traditional teleconferencing. And then it allows members of the public to access the meeting or directly address the legislative body before or during the body's consideration of an item that is within the subject matter of the jurisdiction, same as the traditional teleconferencing rules. Each agenda item must provide notice of the means by which the public may access the meeting and offer public comment, which also is part of the traditional teleconferencing rules. And now it says the agenda must identify and include an opportunity for all persons to attend via call-in option or an internet-based option. So that's AB 361 right there. Next slide, please. And then you still have to conduct the teleconferencing meeting in a manner that protects the statutory and constitutional rights of the parties and public appearing before the legislative body. That rule was still in the traditional teleconferencing rules as well. Okay, and then AB 361 amended or adds this provision that if either by telephone or by the internet-based option, if there's a service disruption that prevents broadcasting the meeting, or in the event of a disruption within the local agency's control that prevents public comment for those using the call-in or internet-based option, the agency must stop the meeting and take no further action on the agenda items until the public access is restored. Actions taken on the agenda items during a disruption may be subject to challenge, okay? And so public agencies, this is practical advice here, some public agencies may wish to indicate on their agenda how and when remote meetings which are disrupted in this manner will be continued. In other words, that you will suspend, if there is a service disruption, for example, you will suspend the meeting and then resume when the service disruption is restored, for example, on the agenda. You might want to add that as a standing item on your agenda for AB 361 meetings. Next slide, please. So this is the biggest component, that's the biggest change between the traditional teleconferencing rules plus the teleconferencing rules that we were under during COVID-19. AB 361 abolishes any requirement that public comments be submitted in advance of a meeting and must provide an opportunity for the public to address the legislative body and offer comment in real time. So what does this mean? This means that So some agencies during the COVID-19 teleconferencing rules required the public to submit public comments in advance by like 3 o'clock or something like that of the night of the meeting. Under AB 361, and frankly, under any traditional teleconferencing rules or in-person rules, the public agency cannot require that public comments be submitted in advance of the meeting. So you can still require, or you can still ask or allow email public comments, for example, but you would have to allow this real-time comment option for the person to either read their own comment or to speak either by telephone or by internet-based option before and during the consideration of an item. Even though, sorry, before we go into the next one, even though we have to require this public comment in real time, and the legislature actually uses the terminology in real time, the provisions of AB 361 do not require the legislative body to provide a physical location from which the public may attend or comment. So, so even though we have to allow someone to comment in real time on the item, it doesn't mean we have to provide space for them to come somewhere to provide the public comment. They can still provide that via telephone or internet-based. Next slide, please. Great. So under traditional teleconferencing rules or under any other system, you couldn't require people to register. But AB 361 said that if agencies are using like an online third-party system, for example, Zoom, that requires someone to register for Zoom in order to sign up for the meeting or attend the meeting, that's okay. But please note that we likely would have to allow someone to register under a pseudonym like Daffy Duck or something like that. Like you still couldn't require the person to identify themselves via their true name before they provide public comment, okay? And then also under AB 361, a legislative body that provides timed public comment period for each item may not close the comment period or the time to register until the timed period has elapsed. Now, most of my, school district agencies, county office of education agencies, community college district do not have timed public comment period on each one, on each item. So as long as during the period of time that the item is being discussed or deliberated upon, you're allowing people to register during that period of time in order to provide public comment, that's fine. But we don't believe that this really intends with any kind of agency to hold open like public comment period for 10 minutes or something like that if there's no one there to provide public comment, okay? Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is what I was just talking about here. So what it effectively does at the end here, this note, is that any kind of early cutoff of collecting email or comment cards before the end of the applicable comment period is eliminated. So that's really what AB 361 does. So next slide, please. Okay, so one of the things about AB 361 is that it requires the local agency to verify every 30 days that the exemption from traditional teleconferencing requirements is still necessary. So the legislative body must make findings no later than every 30 days after the first teleconference meeting and every 30 days thereafter. And that finding has to be, and usually it's done by resolution, although resolution is not required, but usually the legislative body is considered the state of emergency, or usually through the resolution. What happens is the legislative body is considering the state of emergency circumstances, and then either the state of emergency continues to directly impact the ability of the members to meet safely in person, or state or local officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing. Next slide, please. So what happens if you have meetings that are more than 30 days apart? Some agencies don't meet, they only meet quarterly, for example. And so really to be on the safe side, then you want to meet every 30 days and you have a special meeting and you just do the resolution to continue to do teleconferencing. However, we as a second measure from that, if you at the top of the agenda consider the resolution to meet via teleconference, even if it's beyond the 30 days, we think that is sufficient still to allow whatever action you take during the meeting to be valid. But I do believe that the legislature understands that this requirement to meet every 30 days doesn't work for a lot of agencies. So I've already heard chatter that there's going to be some amendments to this in January. So we'll see what happens with regard to that. AB 361 will automatically, will automatically be repealed on January 1, 2024, unless there's further changes. And I've already talked about what happens if the governing board doesn't meet every 30 days. Next slide, please. Okay, so the one thing I just wanted to point out again is that during the COVID-19 teleconferencing meetings, that the suspension of the rules, the way they were written by the governor, the suspension of the requirements, theoretically allowed a public agency to require public comments to be submitted in advance, in writing, and in advance of the board meeting. A lot of boards really like that. However, again, AB 361 has abolished that requirement, and email comments can still be allowed or can still be submitted, but they must, each agency must allow the public the opportunity to read their comments in real time. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is one of the last slides, and I think I'm within time, hopefully. Anyway, so some of the advantages of AB 361 are that board members can attend the meeting and vote from less than ideal locations, like the private domicile of a home, of a friend or relative, or a hotel room, or even from a car, which actually was not allowed in the traditional teleconferencing rules, because with the traditional teleconferencing rules, which still exist, by the way, you had to post the agenda at the location that you were at and allow the public to attend. With AB 361, I think it recognizes that if someone is under COVID quarantine, right, you can't have someone come to your house, right, because you're under quarantine. That's why you're not, why you're not meeting in person. But so AB 361 does allow, and it allows them more flexibility, and does allow someone to attend from a car, even theoretically. And like I said here, emergencies happen quickly. It does allow sort of this more flexibility than the traditional teleconferencing rules. The disadvantages are, of course, making the findings every 30 days. The disadvantage of not requiring public comment in advance, which really helped streamline the meetings, I think, a little bit better. But also, this is the first time that the law has recognized this sort of meeting disruption that was not part of the traditional teleconferencing rules. And so it requires the local agency to resolve that disruption before taking further action. Next slide, please. And that's it for me. I know this was a lot of information, so if there's any questions or anything, please just let me know.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for providing this information. I really appreciate you being here. It is a lot, but it's interesting, right? The act itself has been around for a while, and the rules around that and how it's morphed, especially in this last year and a half. It's quite interesting. So thank you for that.
Yes, I think it's a good example of the statement that the law doesn't, catch up to technology very fast, and when it does, it's pretty clunky. That social media law is really, I hear a lot of disagreement about that, but anyway.
Neither does Ed Code. Ed Code is really slow about catching up with that technology, trust me.
Yes, there's a lot of things about the Ed Code that I think we all would like to change, but anyway. Okay, so thank you. Have a very good meeting, and I will be signing off. And please just let me know. My contact information is there. If you have any questions, please just let me know. Okay, have a good night, everyone.
Have a good night.
Thank you, Catherine.
Okay, bye.
Great. I just want, the next item we have is adjournment, but before we adjourn, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for your participation. Welcome to our new members. This is good, important work that we are all part of. And so I really appreciate everyone being here, and I'm really happy that we have student voice, community voice, and all the other employees, of course, from SCCOE. So, and I wish everyone a very happy holiday and a good Thanksgiving. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
Before you adjourn, Dr. Bandoris, just a note, our next meeting is December 9th. And then we have our next meeting February 3rd, and then April 7th, May 5th, and May 26th. When we start getting into February and those later meetings, we're really starting to focus on our LCAP, the updates, our SIPSA plans, SARC, all of the kind of the big planning pieces is what we start doing in that really after December. So that's why you see 2 meetings in May. Last year, we added a few meetings because I think this the Governance Council had some great input on the development of the LCAP. So that's why you have those meetings doubled up in May. But in December, I'll be sending out the agenda, and we will be looking at the SARC, the safety plan, and some other budget pieces that we're starting to put together for your review and feedback.
Great. Thank you so much for saying that, Phil. Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn the meeting.
Do I have a
I
second?
second.
Thank you both. All right. Have a
everyone.
wonderful rest of the week. Enjoy your weekend. Be well. Thank
Happy
you.
Thanksgiving, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Happy
Bye.
Thanksgiving.
Happy
Bye-bye.
Thanksgiving.
Great. Nice job.